Look down at almost any road bike in the world, and you'll find one of two brains controlling it. One says Shimano, the other says SRAM. These two companies decide how nearly every cyclist on Earth changes gear and slows down, and yet most riders never actually choose between them. The bike chooses for you. You fall in love with a frame, you like the price, and whatever group set happens to be bolted to it comes along for the ride. But here's what almost nobody tells you at the point of sale. You're not just buying a set of shifters and brakes. You're marrying an entire ecosystem, a whole philosophy of how a bike should work, one that will shape how you ride, how you upgrade, and how you spend your money for years to come. So today, let's pull these two rivals apart and see what you're really choosing between. Because once you understand the difference, that badge on the lever stops being a logo and starts being a decision. And if you enjoy understanding what really makes bikes work, subscribe to Bike Culture, because that's exactly what we explore here. Picture the moment this actually matters. You're standing in a shop or scrolling a website, and you've narrowed it down to two bikes. Same kind of frame, same wheels, almost the same price. On paper, they look like twins. The only meaningful difference on the spec sheet is a single line. One says it's built around Shimano, the other, SRAM. To most buyers, that line is background noise, a detail they skip right past on the way to comparing colors and saving $100 on the cheaper one. But that one line is quietly the most consequential choice on the whole page. It decides the motion your thumb makes 10,000 times.
It decides whether you'll be charging a battery on each component or plugging in one central pack every few weeks. It decides how easily you can get spare parts on a tour, whether you can run a mechanical setup, and what it'll cost you to change your mind in 3 years. Two bikes that look identical, separated by one word, and that word shapes years of your riding life. That's how much is hiding behind the badge, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack. To understand the rivalry, you have to understand that these two companies come from completely different worlds, and it shows in everything they make. Shimano is the giant, a Japanese engineering titan whose components are fitted to more bikes than everyone else combined, the default choice of the industry, built on decades of relentless, incremental refinement. If Shimano has a philosophy, it's this: make it work flawlessly, make it available everywhere, and make it a little better every single generation. SRAM is the upstart. Founded in Chicago in 1987, it only entered the road world in 2006, and from the very beginning it defined itself by doing things differently. It chased lightweight, it invented its own single-lever shifting system, and then in 2015 it did something Shimano hadn't. It cut the cables entirely and launched the first production wireless drivetrain the road world had ever seen. That single act reset the entire rivalry, and everything since has been these two giants leapfrogging each other over and over. Now, before we get into how they differ, you need the map, because both brands organize their road group sets into a clear 3-tier hierarchy, and the tiers line up against each other almost perfectly.
At the top, the flagship, no-expense-spared professional-level group sets. That's Shimano's Dura-Ace against SRAM's Red. One step down, the high-performance tier that gives you the vast majority of the flagship experience for a lot less money. That's Shimano's Ultegra against SRAM's Force. And then the tier that matters most to the most people, the mid-range sweet spot, where the vast majority of real, actual bikes are built. That's Shimano's 105 against SRAM's rival. Remember those pairings because they're the key to cutting through the confusion. When someone tells you a bike has rival on it, you instantly know it's competing with a 105 bike. When you see Force, think Ultegra. It's the same fight, just fought at 3 different price points. And here's something that surprises people. When you put the direct rivals side by side, the weight difference between them is almost nothing. At the same tier, these group sets weigh within a few dozen grams of each other, close enough that you would never feel it on the road. Which means the old habit of arguing about grams is mostly a distraction. The real differences, the ones you'll actually notice every time you ride, aren't about weight at all. They're about how the thing feels in your hands and what kind of world it locks you into. So let's start with your hands, because this is where the two philosophies diverge most sharply and where a lot of riders discover a strong preference they never knew they had. The way you actually change gear is fundamentally different between these two brands, and it comes straight from their history. SRAM built its name on a system called DoubleTap, a beautifully minimalistic idea where a single lever behind the brake does all the shifting.
A short push moves one way, a longer push moves the other. One lever, both directions.
Shimano took a different path, using two distinct, separate controls for shifting up and down, so each action has its own dedicated paddle or button. Neither is right or wrong, they're just different feels, and riders often develop a genuine loyalty to one or the other. In the modern wireless world, this shows up as SRAM's crisp button presses through its Axis system versus Shimano's own distinct electronic click through Di2. It sounds like a small thing, but you make thousands of shifts on every ride, and the one that feels natural to your hands is the one you'll quietly love for years. If you're enjoying this kind of deep dive into the details that actually matter on a bike, subscribe to Bike Culture so you don't miss the next one. There are some real performance differences too, though they're matters of nuance rather than knockout blows. Historically, Shimano's front derailleur shifting, the shift between your two front chainrings, has been regarded as noticeably faster and more refined, one of the quiet things Shimano has simply always done exceptionally well. SRAM has closed that gap enormously with its latest designs, using new architecture to speed those front shifts up, but it's a place where Shimano's reputation was hard-earned. On the other side, SRAM's top-tier braking has been widely praised for delivering powerful, confident stopping with less effort at the lever. Both brands brake superbly, to be clear, but each has its subtle signature. And at the higher tiers, both offer extra hidden buttons and satellite shifters, little controls you can add on the tops of the bars or the drops for shifting in an aggressive aero position.
Just note that on the mid-range group sets, the ones on most real bikes, those extra buttons are usually the feature you give up. It's one of the small, honest compromises of the sweet spot tier, and worth knowing before you assume every group set in a family behaves the same. The pattern holds across both brands. The mid-range gives you the core shifting and braking performance almost intact, and quietly removes the little luxuries, the hidden buttons, the fanciest materials, a touch of bearing polish that only the top tiers carry. But the deepest difference between Shimano and SRAM isn't any single component. It's the ecosystem, the entire world you step into when you commit to one of them, and this is the part that really deserves your attention before you buy. Choosing SRAM at the modern electronic level means choosing a fully wireless world. Every component has its own battery, there are no shift cables at all, and the whole system is tied together by an app that lets you customize your buttons, check your battery levels, and integrate with your bike computer. It also, crucially, means disc brakes, because SRAM's electronic AXS group sets are disc-only. Shimano offers a different bargain. Its electronic Di2 system is wired, running on thin cables to a single central battery that lasts for weeks. But Shimano also gives you something SRAM largely doesn't anymore: choice. Shimano still makes mechanical group sets, still makes rim brake options further down the range, and generally offers a wider spread of configurations for riders who don't want the all-electronic, all-disc future just yet. So the real question isn't just,
And that word world is not an exaggeration, because there's a practical weight to it that shows up in your daily life as a rider. Consider sheer availability. Shimano's dominance isn't just a bragging statistic, it's a real-world convenience. When roughly 7 out of every 10 bikes are running Shimano, that means the parts are everywhere. A worn chain, a broken shifter, a service in a town you've never visited before, chances are the shop will have what fits. SRAM is the minority, and while it's superbly supported in the modern world of apps and dealers, you are statistically choosing the less common path. Then there's the cost of ever changing your mind. Because these two ecosystems don't really mix, you can't casually bolt a SRAM shifter onto a Shimano drivetrain and expect it to work in harmony. They speak different languages. So when you commit to one, you're not just buying today's components, you're buying into the parts you'll replace, the upgrades you'll add, and the spares you'll carry for the whole life of that bike. Switching later doesn't mean swapping one part. It usually means replacing the entire group set, one of the single most expensive things you can do to a bike. That's why the badge you barely noticed on the shop floor deserves a genuine moment of thought, because it's far stickier and far more expensive to undo than almost anything else on the bike. If you want more videos that cut through the specs and explain what they actually mean for riders, subscribe to Bike Culture. Nowhere do these two philosophies diverge more dramatically than off the tarmac, in the world of gravel, and it's a perfect window into how differently these companies think. SRAM has thrown its weight behind a radical.
Its dedicated XPLR group sets have gone to 13 speeds and, more strikingly, to a single front chainring, ditching the front derailleur entirely for simplicity and a huge gear range from one ring. Shimano, characteristically, has taken the more conservative, established route. It keeps its road group sets like Ultegra strictly to the traditional 2 chainring setup, and it puts its gravel-specific components into a completely separate dedicated line called GRX. One brand is betting boldly on a simpler single-ring future. The other is defending the proven, versatile two-ring tradition and keeping its categories neatly separate. Neither is wrong, but they tell you everything about the difference in temperament between the disruptor and the giant. And this really is the heart of why this rivalry is so good for you, the person actually buying the bike. Because these two companies are locked in a relentless game of leapfrog, and it has been going on for years. SRAM cuts the cables and goes wireless, so Shimano is pushed to perfect its own electronic system. Shimano refines and dominates the mid-range, so SRAM is pushed to bring its wireless tech down to more affordable prices. SRAM redesigns the shape of its hoods for better comfort, so Shimano feels the pressure to respond in kind. Every single leap by one forces a leap by the other, and the person who wins from all that frantic competition is you. Features that were once exclusive to $5,000 flagship group sets tumble down year after year into the mid-range bikes that ordinary riders actually buy. Without this rivalry, without each giant terrified of being left behind by the other, none of that would happen nearly as fast. The war between them is quietly funding your upgrade.
So, how do you actually choose when the badge finally comes down to a real decision? Here's the honest framework. First, understand that at the same tier, you're not choosing better or worse. You're choosing a personality. If you want the safest, most proven, most widely serviced option on Earth, the one where any shop in any town will have the parts, Shimano's sheer dominance is a genuine practical advantage. If you specifically want that beautifully refined front shifting, or you want the flexibility of a mechanical or rim brake setup, Shimano is your answer. But if you're drawn to a fully wireless bike with deep app customization, if you love the idea of a simple single-ring gravel setup, or if you want the cheapest possible route into electronic wireless shifting through something like Rival, then SRAM is calling your name. And above all, if you possibly can, get your hands on both. Because the single biggest deciding factor, bigger than weight, bigger than specs, bigger than brand loyalty, is which shifter simply feels right under your fingers. That's a preference only your own hands can tell you. So here's where we land, a long way from just reading the logo on the lever. Shimano and SRAM are not really competing to be the same thing done better. They're offering you two genuinely different philosophies of what a bike should be. Shimano, the refined, dominant, endlessly available giant that perfects and offers choice. SRAM, the bold, wireless, app-connected disruptor that would rather reinvent than refine. Neither one is the right answer for everybody, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling their own loyalty, not your best interest. The badge on your shifter was probably chosen for you by the bike you fell for and the price you could afford.
But now you know what actually sits behind it. Not just a brand, but a whole way of riding, upgrading, and spending for years to come. So the next time you're